Welcome to The Plunge with Holser. Navigator Derek here, trying to chart our course through some very mystical content, deeply philosophical, esoteric, and insightful. Today's guest is a new friend of mine, Eugene Terekhin. Eugene is originally from Siberia, relocated to the U.S. in the last 10 years. Eugene is a philologist, philosopher, and translator, as well as an author of 11 Hidden Gems in the Work of Inklings, the music of Iluvatar in the Worlds of Tolkien, Lewis, and Barfield, as well as a book I recently enjoyed very much and highly recommend, 44 Mystical Insights into the Fantasy Books of Tolkien, Lewis, and Owen Barfield. I have found Eugene to be deeply thoughtful, cosmopolitan in his graciousness. I'm thankful you're here. And I'm grateful to Eugene for being willing to take the plunge. Let's dive in. Hey guys, quick interruption before we jump into the episode with Eugene. Last-minute addition to this episode interrupted my workout because I wanted you to know that at the conclusion of this conversation you're about to enjoy on Owen Barfield is an exclusive composition that was inspired by Barfield's book, The Silver Trumpet, and composed by Eugene's friend, Rishat Birushev. So Rishat has put that together, and you can enjoy it at the end. And there's an illustration of the two princesses by Eugene's wife, Ina. I think you'll find them lovely, and you can look in the show notes to see Rishat's YouTube channel. But just want to let you know we've got a special musical number for this episode. Enjoy. Well, today I'm so thrilled to be with Eugene Terekhin. And Eugene, thank you so much for joining The Plunge as we talk a little bit more about Owen Barfield.
Thank you for having me.
First off, I'm wondering if you'd be willing to share your personal journey, kind of what your childhood activities and interests were and how you found your way to the United States and to your current vocation.
Yeah, I was born in the USSR in Siberia in the city of Omsk. OMSK. So it was a pretty large town, military, a lot of military plants, production. And my mother was an engineer. My father was an electrical engineer at the military plant. My mother later became a programmer, and she was always interested in languages, and she kind of encouraged that in me. And so I started reading in English pretty early. I remember reading one book in school, which gave me so much English that was able to kind of go through the whole curriculum ahead of everybody else, even ahead of the teacher. And she said at the end, I didn't teach you anything. You just learned it all yourself. Okay, whatever. Anyway, and then I studied English and German in the university in the foreign language department in Omsk. And so in my third year, I believe, I met a group of missionaries from the US, and I started interpreting for them. And so that was my first exposure to the Bible and to spirituality. Because in the USSR, I mean, my mother and father are atheists, and it's just not customary to talk about spirituality very much. So, and then when I graduated, I decided to try translating professionally because that's pretty much my training. So I got hooked up with a couple of publishers that were interested in translating all kinds of books, mostly Christian books, but all kinds of books into Russian. So that was really fun. I worked with a Lutheran, what's it called? A Lutheran Foundation, something like this. And then a few other publishers like that. So I really liked it, and I decided I'm going to go ahead with it and just become a translator full time. And that's what I've been doing up to this day. I've also interpreted, I still do interpretation, and then I've added Ukrainian to English, and I've also been writing books recently, and do some woodworking as well. Just for fun.
Yes. I've seen a bit of your content on TikTok.
Good.
Is it Elvish Crafts?
Elvish Crafts, yes, on Etsy.
Yeah. Very cool. So I'd love to go back. You were in university in Omsk, and that's
Hmm.
when you first encountered stories from the Bible, spirituality, or any conception of God. Was there anything in mythology or any type of spirituality in the atmosphere when you were growing up?
Well, that was very, very interesting because officially the Soviet Union removed all spirituality and all, every mention of God from culture, from everything. But somehow God kind of found his way in the culture, and I must say that all of the Soviet culture is permeated with God and even the Bible, I should say. So if you watch movies done in the Soviet era, they're like full of mysticism. They're full
Hmm.
of seeing beyond the veil of the world. It's just crazy. But when I started reading the Bible, I quickly realized that it's all there. So
Hmm.
all the things that I loved in the culture and still do, somehow all tied up, could be traced to something, to some codes, biblical codes or eternal patterns that were there.
Hmm.
And it was like, okay, that's where it comes from.
Fascinating.
And yeah, it still continues. Such revelations still come up to this day when I read the Bible, and it's like, oh my goodness, this is where that is coming from.
Hmm.
And I didn't realize that.
Hmm. And how was it that because you now live in Texas,
Mhm.
how did you make your way? What stage of life were you when you came to the United States?
Well, we came in 2016, so it was 8 years ago, 8 years ago.
Okay.
And we had family here. My mother was here, my sister was here. So they, at one point, they said, "Do you want to come over and see what the U.S. is like, and see maybe if you like it here, you can stay, and if not, you go back." We thought the politics in Russia were really on a very, walking on thin ice in ways. And we thought maybe we'd give it a shot. And
Hmm.
so we came here, we stayed for a year. We kind of liked it, and and then, of course, the politics in Russia just started basically everything started falling apart and going a really, really strange route. And so we were actually glad that we're here.
Wow.
So
Would you be willing, just because, I grew up in the 80s, and
mm,
so the Cold War was prevalent. Rocky 4 was a very popular movie in my youth, and I'm just curious from your perspective. You're genuinely the first person I've had the opportunity to meet who lived in Russia during that transfer and change with
mhm.
respect to the USSR. And I'm just curious, what was it like before and after? What kind of differences in the culture, or were there any, at least where you were located in Siberia?
Yeah, what kind of changes do you mean?
Yeah, I don't even know what to ask because I only know what was portrayed in our popular culture. So I've never
Uh,
visited Russia. I did visit Kiev 15 or 16 years ago. That's the
mhm,
closest I've ever been to Russia. So I have no knowledge other than movies I
mhm.
saw here and whatever the politicians said in the United States.
Yeah, yeah. Well, let me think back. I mean, it's been so long since the 80s. Well, I was in school, but I can tell you the 80s in the USSR was a really interesting time because everybody sort of felt that, you know, something should be changing soon. Like it cannot go on like this for a very long time. My history teacher, for instance, she would be flipping back and forth in her curriculum,
Hmm.
like does like in the past they would teach like the doctrine of the Communist Party in school, but all of a sudden she would kind of stop and change, and I could see she was hesitant whether she should just go ahead and talk about that, or maybe something will change tomorrow and I should kind of change colors. And then I don't know, it was like you could feel that something drastic is coming. And then, of course, in 91, the country kind of collapsed very quickly. And actually, I mean, young people were elated for the
Mm-hmm.
most part. The
Mm-hmm.
older generation was kind of, what have we come to? I mean, what's going to come of it eventually?
Yeah.
And I believe a lot of them, up to this day, they are craving for the return of the USSR because of the stability that they had. Uh, Not so much younger people are different, of course, but still, you know,
Yeah. Yeah.
that way.
Wow. Well, thank you.
So,
Thank you for sharing that. I
mhm.
didn't mean to pry too much, but as someone who was completely brought up in this atmosphere, I was a sophomore, 10th grader, I think, when the Berlin Wall fell. So this was very much a big part of my teen years for sure. So
Mm,
I appreciate
mm,
you sharing that. And
yeah.
my last question is just the
Yeah,
difference
go
in
ahead.
the difference in climate from Siberia to Texas. How has that adjustment been?
Okay, I can tell you that as a Siberian, I really enjoyed the first 3 summers here because I was thawing. I was thawing and thawing after living there for more than 40 years. And then all of a sudden, I reached a point where I can't take it anymore. I need to get out. Every summer
Yeah.
we get out.
Yeah.
Yeah,
It's too hot, right?
it is. It is. Uh,
Yeah. Thank you. Thank you for sharing that, Eugene. I really appreciate it.
yeah, sure.
I'd love to turn as we talk about Owen Barfield. I assume you, maybe I shouldn't assume, but one of his books in particular, Saving the Appearances, you've mentioned to me that it's the glue that holds all things together in Barfield and the other Inklings as well. So I'd love for you to tell me what you mean by that.
Well, I came to Saving the Appearances last of all
Mm.
the other works. The first one was The Silver Trumpet.
Hmm.
And what's interesting is that when I read Saving the Appearances later, like probably 10 years after, I realized, okay, it's all about the silver trumpet. And then I read on, the Barfield website, there's an article where it says basically that Owen Barfield actually claimed himself that there was only one thing he was saying throughout his whole life. His message never changed.
Mm.
And I was like thinking, okay, what could it be? I mean, there's one thing that he keeps repeating throughout his whole life. And by the end, I think by the end of Saving the Appearances, I kind of got the clue and this glue, and the connection to his fiction story that he wrote in 1925.
Mm.
And I don't even know if he knew what he was writing about.
Yeah.
But certainly by the time he wrote Saving the Appearances, his philosophy was full-fledged with pretty much the same ideas. But it all has to do with this tension between a lost image or a lost appearance and a saved appearance. Uh, in the story, in the Silver Trumpet story, there are two princesses,
Hmm.
and their appearances are alike. They're like two peas, basically, and everybody confuses them. Everybody mixes them up all the time. And when I started reading, I'm gonna go, switch back and forth between these two
Sure.
books because it's helpful that way. So when I read in Saving the Appearances that, Barfield slowly brings the reader to the point of realizing that we as modern people have deified appearances. It
The
kind of
the
clicked for
the
me. The outer image, how things look, and that's just the result of the rational, scientific
hmm
mindset, consciousness, non-participatory consciousness.
hmm
And basically, what happened is that looking at the world through the scientific lens, we take images literally. That's
mm.
basically I'm almost quoting him from Saving the Appearances. When I look at the tree and I say there's there's nothing in this tree besides what meets the eye, except what I can see, touch, explore, study, basically the data, hard data. There's
Hmm.
nothing there. It becomes basically an idol, a deified appearance. So the same thing happens in the story in a mythical way.
Hmm.
because when Violetta, their two sisters are Violetta and Gambetta. So when they grow up, the prince shows up, Prince Courtesy shows up, and he wants to marry Violetta, of course, because she's the kind one. So the difference between the two sisters is striking because they are alike in appearance, but they're totally different on the inside.
Hmm.
So yeah, and of course the prince wants to marry the good girl, the one that has the appearance of goodness and the goodness.
Yes. Yeah. The virtuous one.
The virtuous one, not Gambetta. But he's always like concerned and like I don't remember exactly what Barfield says, but like he was afraid that in the confusion of the moment he might marry the wrong girl.
Hmm.
That would be a disaster. Well, he ends up marrying the right girl, but something really strange happens and
Hmm.
he loses her. What happens is that he loses the silver trumpet that his dad, his father, the king, gave him and gave him a solemn, solemn charge to never ever part with it
Hmm.
because it's a magical thing. He lost it, and he lost it in a very strange way. He basically, after marrying Violetta, he got the right word, got so much. I'll say he was craving her love so much that when she asks him to give it to me, I want to play with it, he kind of, to
Okay.
please her, she says, okay, go ahead. Just be careful, but, just play with it. So she takes it, she plays it, but she doesn't know what it is. So she just leaves it out somewhere. And of course, Gambetta finds it and
Hmm.
hides it away.
Hmm.
So after he loses the silver trumpet, he loses Violetta. Eventually, she dies. He dies. And he ends up with Gambetta because she imposes herself as a lost appearance, as the husk of his beloved.
Hmm.
So he sort of has some reminder of his beloved, but he doesn't. It's just an empty thing. Moreover, probably he is not aware of that, but Barfield makes it clear that almost like demonic influences come into the mountainy castle, and the whole land is affected by that.
Hmm.
So going back, I'm going to flip back to saving the appearances.
Yeah.
So basically, we have this scientific worldview which says, okay, if something can't be measured, it doesn't exist. Like if I look at this tree and I can say that, measure this and this and this, therefore it exists. But we can't really tell if there's anything beyond it, if there's any spirit behind it, if there's anything that is represented by these appearances,
Hmm.
you know, like symbolized by. That Barfield kind of makes it clear that the difference between an idol and an icon is exactly this tension between the lost appearance and the saved appearance. If I deify the appearance of the tree, I will basically not be able to see anything beyond. But if I'm able to say, this tree is a shadow, a symbol of something larger, it's just a phenomena, a representation of something invisible,
Hmm.
then I'm able to go through the thing or through the shadow, using Platonic terminology, through the shadow land to the world of ideas and commune. This is the central idea in Barfield about, and when he talks about the final participation, our ability to commune with a spirit through the visible phenomena. And going back to the story, so the silver trumpet is lost. And the silver trumpet kind of represents this ability in a human being. It's poetic imagination, basically, which allows us to look at the clouds and see the glory of God, which allows us to talk like you and I talk now, but there's something else going on besides just our conversation.
Yes.
So if we have allowed this poetic imagination to be there, we will commune with the eternal spirit. If we don't, we're going to just say, okay, we're having this linear conversation, one-on-one. All there is to it is what you see, you get what you see, basically,
Yeah.
nothing
Yeah.
else. So, but later on in the story, the silver trumpet gets found,
Mm.
but he is found by the second prince, or
Hmm.
basically kind of the second Adam, so to say, because Prince Kersey is the first Adam. He fell from grace.
Uh-huh.
He lost poetic imagination. He deified his beloved. He ended up with a husk of his beloved, and
Hmm.
he died. I mean, it's clear, like the way Barfield describes what happened to Prince Kersey is basically he's like a walking dead,
Mm-hmm.
like, and it really represents what we have in our, the kind of state of our society, modern society, like this total boredom, total like people are possessed with like everything material and
Yeah.
nothing spiritual. And I think Barfield actually, at the end of the Saving the Appearances, he actually talks about it. He says that in Hebrew, the definition of an idol is something that is entirely devoid of spirituality whatsoever.
Hmm.
So we're kind of feeling the onslaught of that more and more. But the
Mm-hmm.
reason is really simple. We have lost the silver trumpet. We have lost this poetic imagination and the ability to see more than meets the eye, you know,
Hmm.
go beyond the veil. And that's actually, I understand it as this glue between all the Inklings, because Lewis, of course, is famous for his love of Plato and the Shadowlands. And his
Right.
whole Narnia is a thing and a thing and a thing and a thing and a thing. Everything opens up into something else. You just need the eyes to see. And
Mm-hmm.
in Tolkien, it's the same thing. It's yeah. But by the way, if I can go back in the Silver
Yeah.
Trumpet, one
Yes.
of the one of the interesting characteristics of Princess Violetta when she is a young girl and then when she grows up is that she's a dancer,
Hmm.
and she dances in such a way that actually whoever sees her, it just everybody gets enlivened by just seeing that dance. That's what Prince Kersey gets enamored of, like
Hmm.
enchanted by. It's like a chant and an enchantment at the same time. So he falls under that enchantment. So the dance in Tolkien's Silmarillion, there's a very similar passage when Beren is enchanted by the dance of Luthien in the middle of the forest of Tinuvio. And so the idea is very, very sociological, so to say, because in the book of Proverbs, it talks about how the divine personification of divine wisdom, Sophia, danced. It says
Yes.
she danced on the circle of the world.
Mm-hmm.
She danced when the first dust of the earth was formed before the
Mm-hmm.
face of God. So this whole enchantment is present in Silver Trumpet and in Lewis, I believe, in the Song of Aslan, and also in the Silmarillion in many other ways. So um, what was I gonna say?
As the glue that holds all the Inklings together,
Yeah,
perhaps.
yes. So anyway, but
Wow.
the second prince. Oh, that's what I was gonna say. The second prince falls. His name is Prince Pirio. So he is the second Adam, and he falls in love with Violet's daughter, Lily, Princess Lily.
Okay.
But Barfield introduces his very whimsical character, I should say, in a very strange way, that he saw Princess Lily's portrait brought by a merchant from a foreign land. And he repeats it several times, but he fell in love with the girl, not with the portrait. And at first I was like, I didn't have a clue. Why would he repeat it two times in a row? And then it dawned on me because that's exactly where Prince Courtesy fell. He
Mm-hmm.
loved the picture, the
Hmm.
appearance,
Hmm.
more than the substance. And
Hmm.
that's why he gave up his only treasure that could keep both the appearance and the substance there. Anyway, but I'm
Wow.
gonna tell you I mean, I don't want to spoil the effect of the story, but Prince
Yeah.
Perio finds the silver trumpet and reverses the curse. So
Yeah.
the idea is like only the poetic imagination can
Mhm.
ultimately reverse this curse that we are under of worshiping idols, and just bringing the whole world alive back to its dancing, because everything is ultimately full of Sophia and everything is dancing.
Yes. Yes.
Everything is chanting. Everything is chanting, and that's why it's enchanting, so to say.
That's right. The
Um,
rhythmic movements of everything, from the
yeah,
smallest atom to the largest, you know, star or
yeah,
whatever might be larger than that out there,
yeah,
right?
yeah,
It all sings and reverberates with the unseen
yes,
manifesting before us.
yeah, yeah.
In
Or the
the
coming of the surf. I mean, the coming of the waves. It's
Yeah,
really like it's a prayerful chant.
yeah.
That's why the surf is so enchanting.
That's why you can just sit at the beach and just be.
And be.
Yeah, yeah. Huh. Uh, Man, it's quite a bit to digest, Eugene. Can I ask you? You mentioned you came to Saving the Appearances later on. Was the Silver Trumpet the first thing of Barfield you read, or
Yes,
was there something else?
yes, it was the first one. In fact, it was a good friend of mine. Her name is Michelle Womble, who recommended this book to my wife first, and she read it first, and she said, "It's such a good book, you have to read it." And I said, "Okay, okay." So I read it, and I didn't get anything. I mean, and she said, "You should just plunge into it, you know." And I
Yeah,
plunged into it, and on the second reading, I said, "Oh my goodness, that's what's going on." So it's so serendipitous how things happen.
yeah. Well, you're not the first person in these conversations I've been having on an array of topics with a variety of thinkers, people with their own passions, or, sort of a hierarchy where this person really resonates with the work of Lewis, or this person with Tolkien, or this person, you name it. And yet often they will say for the things that gave them the most insight, inspiration, it was a multiple reading of the
Hmm.
text that brought them to that place of transcendent insight.
Yeah, yeah. I
Yeah.
think it deserves a rereading. I think it was Lewis himself who actually said somewhere he made this differentiation between a good taste in literature and a bad taste in literature. And I really, really like it. He said, a good taste in literature is when you can go back to a book that you love and reread it like you meet an old friend. Because you
Yeah.
do not exhaust a friend. You cannot exhaust another person. It's always interesting. Whereas a bad taste in literature is like reading tabloids. You read it and you throw it away. You don't go back to it.
That's for sure. That's
Yeah.
great. And so after you encountered the silver trumpet, how much would you say of the Owen Barfield corpus have you read?
I've not read too much. I've read some of Poetic Diction, which is very intriguing. I've read some of his articles, very interesting. I'm actually part of a Russian-speaking group on Facebook dedicated to Barfield, and they actually get together through Zoom and have their sessions and readings, and they discuss Barfield quite a bit. So it's been so enlightening, you know, going back. But I wouldn't
Yeah.
say I'm very, very deep into the lore.
Yeah. Have you done any translations into Russian, or I
Yes,
assume there are some out there?
there. Yes, there are. Actually, Owen Barfield's grandson introduced me to the translator of the Silver Trumpet, Maria Shaskolskaya, way before I started. Actually, no, no, no. I'd already started translating it into Russian by myself. And then he said, and I wrote him asking for permission. And he said, "Oh, it's already been translated." And he introduced me to Maria. And then I said, "Okay, never mind. I'll just keep translating because I just love it." I mean, his style is so British and so grotesque and funny at the same time. And I was wondering if I'd be able to transfer the same mood into Russian. It's finished,
Yeah.
but a friend of mine who's also a Russian, he's a Russian composer, and he read my translation to his children. And he said, while reading it, I heard music in my mind. So I want to write music
Oh,
for everything. And I actually might find the theme of the silver trumpet because it's totally amazing. I might be able to send it to you if you like, because he's still
I would love
working.
that. I would love that. Part of me thinks that there has to come the opportunity for these to be made into film, some of
Yeah,
these
absolutely.
fables.
Yes.
Next question, you've unpacked the story of the silver trumpet. So I wanted
Mm,
to ask, and maybe this will be a little repetitive, but in your own book, one of your books, which I read, and I apologize, I had it, my office is a mess. I've been traveling too much, but I had it with me on a recent trip, and I believe, is it 44?
Insights, the long one, into
Yeah,
the four mystical insights into the works of Lewis Barfield and
Tolkien.
Tolkien.
Yes,
Yeah.
I will definitely put up a link to that in the show notes for this. I thought it was really well done. I think it's tremendously accessible. It's bite sized for people.
Mm,
And each thought, you take something from one of their works and give a little reflection to it. And I think it's really, really meaningful. So I appreciate it. But in one of those, you wrote that the Silver Trumpet is a playful prelude to all the other fantasy books by the Inklings, and that it predates and
mm,
anticipates the other secondary worlds of the Inklings as mirrors of invisible realities, which we've talked a
yeah.
little bit about. But I was curious if you had any additional insights in that resonance, and to a point you made earlier, wondering whether Barfield even was aware of the depth of what was coming out as he wrote that.
Yeah. Yeah. Oh yeah, thank you. This is a really good question. I think the whole magic of the sound is what
Mm,
glues the Inklings together. Lewis talks about the power of poetry, especially in his poems, just the power of the kind of words, kind of speaking that is inspired by Mercury, almost like the true
yeah,
word, you know. And the power of the sound is, I mean, when you think about it, is really something amazing because Tolkien's world starts with the music of Iluvatar.
right.
Lewis's world starts in the Song of Aslan.
Mm,
And Barfield talks about this magic of silver trumpet as if it sort of predates everything. And our relationship with the phenomena of the world, whether it's trees or people or surf or stars, is determined by that initial code, that music that is there. When we lose touch with that music,
mm,
we deify the matter, we deify the world, and we invite trouble. We basically invite the demonic forces into the world. So in Tolkien's Silmarillion, the same idea is captured in the fall of Melkor, this evil protagonist, was like a satanic figure, because everything was created in the music, and all of the Ainur, those powers or archangels, whatever you call them, were the offspring of Iluvatar's thought. But one part of Iluvatar's thought, called Melkor, rebelled. He just decided that his own separate music is more important than the music of everybody else together. And
yeah.
he elevated the matters of his own imaginings above that of the brethren. And so he fell from grace. And he fell by falling from the music. The whole idea is kind of mind blowing because we do this all the time. I do this every day. I fall away from the music when I elevate my own imaginings of my own heart and mind above that of the others. And so when I lose touch with that sound,
Mm,
I infiltrate my world with demons, basically. All
hmm.
kinds of bad stuff. So, I mean, if you read the ending of the Silver Trumpet, if you remember, the way Prince Perio brings about a reversal of the curse is that he just starts playing. He starts blowing the trumpet. It's like the trumpet blast in the Book of Revelation
Mm-hmm.
that ends the history, ends that story, and ushers in the kingdom at the
Mm-hmm.
twinkling of an eye, at the last trumpet, at the last trumpet. So the trumpet that Prince Perio, when he recovers the silver trumpet and blows it, what happens with the two princesses is really amazing because they swap places. Violetta was in the grave, but because of the sound of the trumpet, it swaps places with Gambetta. Gambetta ends up in the grave, but Violetta comes back to life in her former glory, and she's resplendent, and she's dancing, and they perform the dance at the end. But then a very strange thing happens also. People saying that there wasn't a Gambetta to start with.
Wow.
They eventually forget about. Of course, some people say, of course she was. There was such a person because you see, she did this bad thing, she did this bad thing, and all kinds of bad things that she did. But slowly, the memory of her gets erased, as if she didn't exist, and people can't even find the road to her grave. And that's just the ultimate triumph of the sound of the trumpet that brings the dead from the
Yeah.
dead. And that's also an incredible picture of what happens to the world the moment we rediscover the poetic imagination. Suddenly, even in the twinkling of an eye, a dead thing becomes a living thing, kind of swaps places. And we see the same thing in all of the Inklings, as far as I know. I'm not an expert, I'm just an amateur.
Well, you're an aficionado. It makes me ask the question whether or not, with forgive me, it's pronounced Gambetta.
Gambetta.
Gambetta is the husk, or the one without virtue, who becomes the idol or is the idol.
Mm-hmm.
It makes me ask the question with respect to people forgetting that she existed, not being able to find the path to her grave, whether or not she actually ever did, or, and I mean this as a metaphor, like those things that are those idols, do they ever actually exist, or are they manifestations of the false desires, the falling away from the reductionism that comes when we avoid or reject the music? Anyway, this is just
Yeah. Well, this is a good
percolate.
question. I don't really know, but I think based on what St. Paul says, that an idol is nothing in the world.
Yeah.
So basically, I mean, all these things, whether it's precious metals or wood or whatever we deify, work in our, it's just a substance, basically. But we
Yeah.
take this substance for the spirit that it represents. And I would say that's probably how this fall from grace happens in the world. So yeah, I'm not sure, but I think it's us, and that's why the salvation is so tied up with the revelation of the sons of God. When
Yes.
we are able of this final participation,
Hmm.
as Barfield talks about it, then even the creation itself will be redeemed. It is
Yeah.
groaning now, but it will be, uh, uh, you know, it will participate and reveal this glorious glory of the sons of God.
I love
Uh,
that. I love that. Well, you mentioned Paul, Apostle Paul. I think of Romans 1 with the passage on, worshiping the creation rather than the creator,
yeah,
which I think
uh,
is directly connected to all of these concepts.
yes, and the world really needs, I think, re-enchantment, and to do that, I think we need to really be open to hear more of its chanting,
Yeah.
to see the chanting of the clouds and the rustling of the leaves, and the conversation with a good friend, like Lewis really liked to talk about the three things that pretty much miraculous. Good friends talking over each other, with each other over a pint of beer, and a man reading a book, and things like family having fun together over at the table, and things like that.
Yeah. Well,
So
yeah, it's very fresh on my mind. I about every 2 or 3 months I go for a hike with my oldest daughter, and today we went on a 9 mile hike, and there were multiple moments throughout where a particular bird caught my attention and just arrested my progress because
mhm.
there was something enchanting about it, or the wind, as you described, through the trees. Where I live in particular, there are lots of very large evergreens and
uh,
old trees draped in moss,
Hmm.
and yeah, it's a very scenic area,
Yeah.
and there's lots of opportunity to wonder, as Tolkien said, and we're not
Mm.
lost. We're
Yes.
re-enchanting ourselves.
Never been to Washington. I have to go there someday.
Yes, you must come up, my friend. I will show you around.
Okay.
I am sure there's some, well, you tell me, there's some pretty majestic mountains where you come from in Russia?
Well, we actually are from a very flat place. Omsk is very
Okay.
flat.
Yeah.
Oil fields, basically. It's just like here in Houston. But if you go south from Omsk, southeast, you will get to the Altai Mountains. They're pretty high. They're not as high as the Alps, but very, very. They're actually part of the Tian Shan, pretty much part of the Himalayas system.
Okay. Hmm.
Yeah, stretching up north. And
Yeah.
because those are gorgeous, absolutely
Yeah.
gorgeous.
Well, during one of your breakaways during the oppressive Houston summer, come up this way.
Okay,
It'll be in the high 70s. There won't be any humidity,
I
and
love it.
everywhere you look is still snow-capped mountains because of the
Oh my
elevation.
God.
Yeah.
Elevation. Yes, yes, yes. We like to go to Lake Tahoe, at least
Oh,
for a
yes.
week to
Very,
cool off.
yeah,
Yeah.
very, very similar in with respect to the mountains. We don't have water quite as gorgeous as Lake Tahoe. That is
Mhm.
spectacular.
Yeah.
Huh, that's
Yeah,
fun.
I was gonna say this is part of the reason I took to woodworking so much.
Hmm.
Because actually when I go around in this little, we have a little grove here with red cedar. There's all kinds of nuts, nut trees, all kinds of tree, oak. I can, by picking up a log, even if it's rotten and old, I can feel some of that chant, some of that by touching the fibers, by smelling the sawdust when I cut it, by putting together. What's amazing to me is that when I try to come up with a design of a lamp, for instance,
Yeah.
when I put too much of myself into the design, it doesn't turn out as good. But when I actually sort of like throw the sticks the way that, the spirit would have them fall, that's
Hmm.
where it's the most beautiful. It's like in
Very
those,
interesting.
yeah, like you look at when we go to Lake Tahoe, you look at the rocks that fall from off a mountain in a very sporadic, like very random way. It's usually much more beautiful than any landscape designer would put them or arrange them in any garden that I've ever seen. Just by falling, they fall in the right place, and it's music, you know. So
That's beautiful. Oh, I
yeah.
appreciate that. I really do. Last question on the silver trumpet. If there's anything more to add, just with respect to how the silver trumpet might inform or inspire our culture today.
Yeah, yeah. Well, one thing that I really love about fairy tales, especially fairy tales by the Inklings, whether they're short or long, it doesn't matter. It's just that the simpler the story, the more it packs. And I grew up reading Russian folk tales, and they're very simple, but it's something in the metaphors and the mythological figures themselves that you look at and you kind of, how would I say that, you almost recognize something from large, world at large. And the simpler the story, the more interesting it is. And Silver Trumpet is a very, very simple story. I mean, it's so simple that it reads on its own beautifully. As far as I can remember, I think Tolkien would said once that his children enjoyed the Silver Trumpet much more than his fairy tales. And so it reads. It's like Winnie the Pooh. It reads on any level. But you can. I mean, I've seen actually books on Winnie the Pooh and Heidegger, and on the concept of nothingness, and it really makes a lot of sense. You know, there's wisdom, wisdom there. So the simpler, the better.
Yeah.
you know.
We'll have to do a series on Winnie the Pooh. I do so enjoy
Yeah,
the
yeah,
simplicity, but again, that winsomeness that is
yeah.
very revelatory to the human nature. Is there any distinction to be made as you talk about the cultures and that as you reference Lewis talking about friends getting together over a pint? Is there a more collegial community feeling in the culture you grew up in relative to American?
Yes, yes, very much so. Well, Russia is a very community-based culture, society. It's been so for centuries, because Russian Orthodoxy is very community-based, much more so. But then there's also a flip side to it because of this. Barfield actually talks about it in Saving the Appearances that we actually need this stage in the evolution of consciousness where people learn to individuate, which
Hmm.
often doesn't happen in a community-based culture that is like when people are too tied up together, they don't really have there's there's no place for an ego to develop, and when ego doesn't develop, it's not good either, you
Hmm.
know. But at the same time, in here in the States, actually, I'm blessed to meet so many people here in the West, even though they've been individuated because they're part of this culture. They they have this incredible longing and even understanding of how community is essential, which to a degree that I sometimes don't even see happening in Russia. So it's
Yeah.
interesting how it happens.
It interests me because I think of the two approaches to human action, call it. What I would say would be the more restrictive, prohibitive approach. And I'm not saying that's necessarily the case, but as you describe it in the communal archetype, there is a preventing a person from fully expressing their individuality.
Hmm.
On the flip side, of course, the overemphasis of the individual leads to a lack of empathy. It leads to utilitarian
Hmm.
approaches to our fellow man. And yet, there's something to me in the nature of freedom, mastery, and participation that almost, as you described Barfield talking about this needing to happen in the stage of the
Hmm.
evolution of consciousness, it's almost like you have to encounter the taboo thing to realize how shallow it is
Oh yeah.
and move beyond it. Does that make sense?
Yes, it does, very much so.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, interesting. I've read somewhere just recently this common root of the words immunity and community. So they come from munis, I believe the Latin word is. And the difference is that immunity is when you isolate and protect yourself from the outside influence.
Yeah.
And and we need that. We need our own space, our own individuation. But the flip side is community, where you realize at a certain point that there's a lot more to this life than just me and my ego. So basically, it's like a child playing around the mother, uh, the child would like run around in circles and not venturing very far. But then, as they feel strong enough and safe enough, they will venture further into the community. So
Mm.
first you get immunity, and then you get the community. And sometimes these two are compromised, but they actually work together somehow.
That makes sense. Thank you. I've got just two more questions, believe it or not.
Oh, sure, sure, sure.
This has gone fast for me. I really, really appreciate it. I've enjoyed it very much.
Has it been an hour? Yeah, it's been an hour. Wow.
Yeah. With saving the appearances, again, the motivation behind what I'm trying to put together here is something that's a little more accessible than a master's level or even an undergraduate level. I really want this to be an introductory level for people who maybe have never even heard of Owen Barfield. And I'm wondering, how accessible do you think Saving the Appearances might be? And are there things that people might want to wrestle with or read prior to that to help them step into its flow of thought?
Well, I would say it certainly needs some commentary,
Uh-huh.
uh, and it needs a very slow reading, especially at the beginning, where he shows the evolution of consciousness from the original participation and then into the individuation and then back to the final participation. I would say, yeah, it'd be really cool if somebody wrote a commentary of, in an accessible way. And then of course it would really be very, very enriching because at the end he basically comes to Christ. And at the end
Mm-hmm.
he talks about the logos, the parable of the sower as being this arc parable, the parable of parables, which
Yeah.
basically kind of lays out like a blueprint for all the other smaller loguses, if you were. Yeah. So,
Yeah.
but yeah, it can be difficult, It really
Yeah.
deserves a rereading.
Well, I'll
Mhm.
see what we can do to help in this series, at least with people. We've got various guests talking about that topic in particular. Uh,
Mhm.
and it's interesting, sort of, I see a resurgence of the notion of the logos or the logos in popular culture of late, at least in
Mhm.
certain circles in American culture. And I don't know. There's a bit of hope, and I love that about Barfield because there's so much hope for what I have classified as the reintegration of the
Mhm.
the primitive and the modern. I think that's what he's driving at with the final participation concept, and perhaps
Mhm.
that would be what I would say I believe is what the appearance of Christ was that full integration in time on
Yeah.
earth. So interesting.
Yeah. Yeah.
Uh,
Yeah. There's so much to plunge into. That's for sure.
yeah, well, that's why we're here. I have another follow up question. If these ideas are resonant, if they're attractive, are there practices that you've incorporated in your life or that you've perceived would be beneficial to us as we seek to be re enchanted ourselves?
Yeah. Well, that's a good question. I thought about it this morning, actually. I would say that any form of poetry really
Mm,
helps, whether it's literally writing or reading poetry, whether it's music or arts or even meditative reading or like going on a hike, trying to observe and really participate in the whole thing, and just being open to this whole Shadowlands
mm,
idea that the world is speaking to us through the shadows. Every leaf and every tree has a story to tell, like the tree beard. There's a long, long story to tell if you're only willing to listen. And sometimes we're like, well, what can a tree tell me? But then even Merry and Pippin had to listen to some of that, bararum, whatever he was saying. But
yeah.
it was the creaking sound of the tree that the tree makes when it's open to the winds,
Mm,
So yeah, I would
yeah.
say and also conversations with people. That's one thing I've been blessed with, and through people like Nate and the whole Grail country
Yeah.
folks. I mean, I try to listen to. I can't keep up with everything, but I try to listen as much as I can. So it's like iron sharpens iron, and there's so much there, and uh, I
Hmm.
mean, my mind gets opened up so much.
Oh, thank you. I, well, and I think too of your woodworking. I imagine there's a contemplative element to
Yeah.
that work. And you referenced Treebeard. The Ents are such a fantastic figure in Tolkien's work, and there's a sacredness to their solemnity and their relative to us, their slow moving,
Yeah.
ponderous nature, right?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Mm.
Yes, yes, there's so much there. I don't know. I don't want to even start because it's
Yeah.
gonna it's gonna get going forever.
Well, we'll come back to that at the tail end of this year, which hard to believe. We've got mapped out episodes taking us all the way to October, November now
Wow.
on different topics, but we're going to do a series entitled Tolkien's Greatest Characters. So I'll
Oh,
I'll come
gonna
back
be good.
around to you for a return for that one.
Oh, sure, sure. I'd love to participate.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Well, on Barfield, do you have any final thoughts on him? And then lastly, where can people discover the work that you're involved in and producing yourself?
Yes. Well, Barfield, it's interesting that, we read Lewis and Tolkien so much, and yet there were other people that they were in a constant conversation with that kind of shaped and sharpened their views, and of course they manifested in such great ways. And it's also interesting to me that it's also, I mean, the story, history repeats itself because
Mm.
you and I talking together now, and then Grail Country and my friends in the Owen Barfield group in Russia, and then my personal friends, we talk philosophy all the time. So there's the spirit is active in such amazing ways. And talking of Barfield, he was a very simple, basically, a very simple idea, the power of sound, enlivening sound. But then he was able to put it and express it in many, many ways, and also pass it on to his
Hmm.
other friends who made use of it, and who resonated with it and found it is so true. It's amazing how the spirit works. Yeah. And I'm really grateful to all the people that I am in contact with. As far as my works, I'm actually about to publish another book in probably a couple of months. It's also going to be in the Inkling series. I don't have the title yet. It's probably like, it's going to be something like fairy tales for grown-ups, something like this.
Nice.
But anyway, but the other books can be found on my website, restandtrust.org, or they're all on Amazon. Yes, all of them are on Amazon. So it's either of the two.
Okay. Well,
They're a
thank
little
you.
cheaper on my website, though.
Okay. Restandtrust.org.
Yes,
And
restandtrust.org.
I've been enjoying your Substack content as well. So be sure to have people check that out.
Yep.
And
Thank you.
your Etsy, Elvish Crafts.
Etsy, Elvis Craft. Yes, yes, yes. Uh,
Thank you, Eugene. This has been very refreshing, enlightening, and deeply enjoyable. I really appreciate it.
yeah. Thanks for having me. Really had a really good hour.
Absolutely. Good. That's my
Thank you.
goal. Today's episode of The Plunge is sponsored by the word philologist. 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 Now, I know what you're thinking. How can I become a philologist? Well, it's not as easy as you think. You see, a philologist is a scholar. So first of all, are you a scholar? Okay, check that box. Next, once you're a scholar, a philologist is a scholar who studies the history of languages, especially through literature. They study written and oral records and work to determine their meaning and authenticity, right? So it's the study of language, yes, but as language makes itself manifest through the storytelling, primarily, of the era and the time and the culture from which the language originated. That sounds pretty interesting to me. I think it's probably a lot of work. According to old Wiki says that philology is it's the intersection of textual criticism, literary criticism, history, and linguistics, with strong ties to etymology. Etymology should probably sponsor a future episode. I need to go back and check. Maybe they already have. I know they've reached out. I can't remember if Susan got back to them or not. Philologist. You see, philologists bring great insight to our culture by taking the text, taking the stories that have shaped our worldview and reflected back to us the conditions of our own circumstances and the issues and challenges we must confront to continue to perpetuate goodness in this time and age. So I'm grateful to those who serve as philologists, and to any budding philologist out there. May I give you a hearty atta person? Go do it. Thank you, philologist, for sponsoring today's episode of The Plunge.